Last year, I was in a statewide engineering competition, full of industry professionals, and this is what I had to present. Now I know that feels unimpressive, but what you just heard wasn't just some piece of pre-recorded audio, but a real-time video game. Here's the version with video for reference. What makes this game special, as you probably already know given that you clicked on this video, is that this game is fully playable with just the audio, making it accessible to people suffering from blindness and other visual impairments. So let's dissect how it works and how well it performed at that competition. First and foremost, I need to go over how I even came up with the idea to do this and how I got it entered into the competition, as it's such a mystery for why I would ever think of doing something relating to blindness, especially game development related. The story of this game's development started when I decided to take up a capstone project for school. This was basically a half-year course in which I was allowed to work on any project of my choosing. Naturally, I wanted to do something relating to game development, and I remembered this old video by Mrs. Is, God, that's so fun to say, Mrs. Is, I'm getting off track. This cataloged how he made a game that could be played with only audio to make it accessible to people with visual impairments. And so I thought this was a perfect project to take on. In addition to the academic component, this project was also connected to a yearly engineering competition that partners with schools across the entire state for people to show off their projects to industry professionals for feedback, with the winners of each category able to get job offers and scholarships. I obviously opted in to participate in this, even if I didn't expect to actually win anything. But before we get into that, let's go over the development process and final design of the game. To address the elephant in the room, the game does have graphics. While the game can be played without them, I still felt the need to add them, as this video would be incredibly boring if it was just an entirely black screen. That being said, I designed these visuals to be in line with the idea of accessibility by focusing on creating simple shapes with high contrast, which expands the scope beyond just blindness and improves the experience for people with general visual impairments. I also added a feature where the graphics can be disabled by pressing H during gameplay, meaning that the graphics are completely optional as well. As for the gameplay itself, I had a lot of shelved ideas that eventually brought me to the final design. Initially, I wanted to use some of our robotics equipment to make a controller, but I decided against it as having the game require the use of a one-of-a-kind controller directly went against the core idea of making this accessible to more people. This meant that for input, I would use keyboard controls. However, I could not use any mouse inputs as blind accessible computers don't actually have mice due to the reliance on sight to know where the cursor is. Another idea was to make it a rhythm game. However, due to my lack of any musical talent whatsoever, I decided against this, though this idea would have more of an impact on the combat system, as we'll see in just a bit. One thing I knew I definitely didn't want to do was make a horror game, as while the lack of information and heightened sound design lends itself perfectly to that, this is the first idea that literally everyone has when making blind accessible games, meaning that not only is that idea already oversaturated, but it's a little demeaning by putting a target audience of people with a disability into a genre relying on a sense of powerlessness. Because of this, I came to the conclusion that I wanted to focus on the combat as a way to fight back, which led to me making a top-down dungeon crawler. With the core idea in place, I needed a way to allow players to navigate with just audio, which, as you might imagine, was a little tricky and required some creative thinking. For controls, you can use the forward and backward arrows in order to move back and forth, depending on the direction that you're looking in, while the left and right arrows will turn you 45 degrees. Originally, I wanted more dynamic turning, but in practice that led to a lot of accidentally walking into walls because it was hard to line yourself up properly. The first set of audio cues I added were pretty basic and would make sense in a standard video game. Footstep audio whenever the player moves is just a nice bit of feedback for input actions. I also added this small hitbox around the player, which when hit by a wall will play a bump sound and disable your footstep sounds while it's still intersecting. As you might imagine, this was to notify players when they run into a wall, which will likely be a common occurrence due to the more vague nature of this game, and I don't want anyone to unknowingly be walking into a wall for 5 minutes. In order to make turning more intuitive, I added a brief gust of wind sound effect whenever you turn. This sound will also always directionally play north, so you can use it as a reference for where you're pointing towards. Finally, as a way to give information of the surrounding area, I made it so that whenever there's an open hallway to your side, you'll hear wind coming in from whatever direction the hallway is in. This will also increase or decrease in volume based on how long the hallway is. On top of these diegetic sound sources, there are two more I added, which, while not making sense within the world, are valuable additions for navigating areas. The first of these is the sonar ping. This works as you might expect it to, where by pressing the key for the ability, you will send out a ping which will play when hitting the nearest wall. This sound will be delayed and get quieter the further away the surface is. The second ability is the objective ping. By pressing O, a ping will play in the direction of the level exit, allowing you to know where you need to be going. And that's everything for navigation. I know it was complicated, but it kind of had to be in order to convert an entire sense into just like 2 sound effects. With movement done, we can get into the other, and thankfully much simpler, half of gameplay, which is combat. The system I landed on for this 2D medieval dungeon crawler was naturally inspired by Batman Arkham. You know, naturally. Funnily enough, that game also started off development as a rhythm game like this did, so I thought it made sense. Anyways, the combat here is made of 2 main actions, those being block and attack. Once an enemy is aggroed, they'll play one of 2 sound effects, either a ding or a crash. If the ding plays, you'll deal increased damage while the crash signifies that the enemy is about to attack you and that you need to block. The timing aspect felt like a good way to add a layer of challenge, while still feeling fair with no visual cues. That's pretty much it for combat. Like I said, it was very simple, at least compared to everything else in this game. After adding a basic tutorial and 2 levels, the game was ready to present at that competition thing I mentioned earlier. I honestly wasn't expecting to actually win anything, and was mostly going for fun, but I still got a lot of great feedback from the hundreds of people from across the state, and had a really good time. Then, after the presentations were done, everyone there sat down and awaited to hear the winners for each category. This was honestly pretty boring. Then they got to the computer science category, which they opened up with something along the lines of, "The vision this student had was incredible." And everyone there from my school just turned to look at me as we all just sat there, sitting there like, wait, did I actually just win? And then they announced the winner, which wasn't me, obviously. But they had me going there for a second, which was really funny. That's all I have to add from that. A bit anticlimactic, I know, but now you know how I felt. This then begs the question, which is if it was finished last year, why didn't I release it? Well, the long and short of it is that I just forgot. Okay, well, I initially planned to keep working on it, but my main motivating factor was to get it ready to be presented at the competition. So once I had done that, I didn't really have the drive to work on it, but at the same time I still had the plans for extra content, so I wasn't going to release it before adding that all in. At this point, it's genuinely been over a year since I last even opened the project, so I just broke down and released it. You can play it for free using the link in the description. I also made the source code freely available on GitHub, so if you want to add custom levels, make your own blind accessible game, or even just see how it all works under the hood, feel free to. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, as it would really help the channel out, and let me keep making more things like this. That's all from me. See you.